firstly, can I welcome the opportunity to make a contribution to this bill. I think, like most of the members who are here this evening and who were here over the last number of days contributing, a lot of us didn't think we'd get the opportunity at all, so I think it's to be welcomed. This is clearly an important piece of legislation, and it'll have a profound impact for so many Irish citizens, and particularly for the women of Ireland. This bill is important not just in terms of respecting the democratic decision of Irish citizens, but most importantly in ensuring women in Ireland have bodily autonomy and are treated equal in their own country, and are no longer forced to travel to access the healthcare they require or take medication in their own homes in an unregulated and potentially unsafe environment. As a people, we've made a decision to no longer bury our heads in the sand and pretend that abortion for Irish women is not a reality. It is a reality. Crisis pregnancy are happening every day, and indeed since the referendum occurred, many have no doubt occurred. Yet for too long the Irish state has lacked compassion and has failed to recognise the difficult circumstances in which women can find themselves when faced with a crisis pregnancy. Our citizens have taken the lead in this issue and have clearly and decisively said no more. With a vote of 66.4% to remove the 8th Amendment from our Constitution, the Irish people have said that they can no longer tolerate a system whereby the needs of our sisters, our daughters, our friends and relatives are not put first. Indeed, in my own constituency of Dublin Fingal, it voted 77% in favour of removing this amendment to the Constitution, and having supported the yes vote in the referendum, I am committed to supporting this legislation as it passes through the Houses of the Oireachtas. To paraphrase the words of Minister Harris following the referendum result, instead of echoing the sentiment of the 8th Amendment whereby women in crisis pregnancies were told to take the boat or the plane, the people of Ireland had said, take our hand. For 35 years, the 8th Amendment was in Bunreacht na hÉireann. At the time of the referendum, no citizen under the age of 53 had ever had the opportunity to have their say on whether or not the 8th Amendment had a place in our society. But on May 25th, voters, both young and old, overwhelmingly stated that this amendment did not represent the society in which they wanted to live. And I'm glad that we now live in a country where such restrictive and oppressive articles no longer have a place in our Constitution. And indeed, many people in this House over many, many years have often said that the Constitution was no place for such an amendment in the first place, that it should be primarily a matter for this House and indeed the Seanad to determine the fine detail, because after all the Constitution is a guidance document. It shouldn't get into this very detailed specifics, and that would be my own view. But it is a view that I believe has support across this country. We've recognised that Irish women are having abortions and will continue to do so. However, as a society, we can no longer force them to travel to another jurisdiction to allow them to access health care, which we should be providing them here at home. In this House, we have spoken greatly about how the referendum result and this legislation will impact upon Irish women. However, I wish to voice my strong support for the changing of the term women in the legislation to pregnant person. In Ireland, we have done so much positive social change in recent years. We must foster inclusion and ensure that no person is left behind. Using the term women in the legislation may have negative impacts and effects for the transgender community, and this is something we can and must avoid. I think we as a society and we in this House must recognise that Ireland has changed dramatically, both in a social sense and in a legislative sense and political terms over many years. And I don't proclaim to understand all of the societal changes. I'm 40, but sometimes I feel old when I try to get to grips with these things. But very honestly and truly, it is not my place to instill my views on anybody else. And that's why, the opportunity to contribute to this bill at this stage of its development is so important to me, but it's so important to so many others. And that's why it's important that not just the Cabinet or my party or the Labour Party or Sinn Féin or any of the parties who are wholeheartedly supportive of this matter, but each individual member should be given the right to have their own say on it. And I say that even regardless of those who were opposing the removal of the 8th Amendment. there has been many discussions over consciousness, conscious decisions, both medical professional and indeed members of the Oireachtas. I believe it's their right to state their own position on this matter. I, however, respect some of the members who were very quick to come out and say that they respected the overwhelming result of the referendum in May, and they will support or acquiesce to this bill passing through the Houses of the Oireachtas. And I think that's the right thing to do, particularly in some constituencies where the decision was not just a landslide, but an extraordinary outpouring of support for the removal of the 8th Amendment from the Constitution. The government has published this bill, the heads of bill, prior to the referendum, and it showed the government's intention for the legislation should the referendum pass. The outlined intention of government to legislate for access for terminations up to 12 weeks with no restriction, only after this, in cases, for instance, where a significant risk to life or health of the mother, or what many may term as fatal fetal abnormality, will lead to the death of the fetus. I believe as legislators that given the strength of the yes vote in the referendum, we have a duty to enact and to give effect to the measures outlined within the heads of bill, and I believe that this legislation does just that. I wish to address, Alaska and Corda, the issue of conscientious objection. While I agree that medical practitioners should be entitled to conscientiously object to participating in a termination, I firmly believe that they should be obliged to refer a patient seeking a termination to a doctor who does not conscientiously object. In a modern society, while respecting the beliefs of each individual, there must be a line upon which we do not impose our own beliefs on others, and as such I believe it is an important requirement for a referral to be of paramount importance. I've read stories recently about how areas in Italy where women may have to visit numerous hospitals before finding a doctor willing to perform a termination, or indeed they might turn to unregulated treatment. And this cannot be allowed to occur in this jurisdiction. We have a duty to ensure that women in Ireland receive the health care that they deserve. The health care that was requested be delivered by this Oireachtas by the people of Ireland, and I believe including the requirement for doctors who conscientiously object to refer to another doctor who does not is vital in achieving this. The referendum decision to repeal the 8th Amendment of the Constitution and to allow for the termination of pregnancies to be regulated by the Oireachtas signifies a maturing in our society and a move to a more compassionate, equal and caring society. A society which is no longer afraid to address the realities which face its citizens. As we debate this legislation, I wish to acknowledge the work of those who campaigned tirelessly for days, weeks, months, years, and even decades in the lead up to this referendum. The women who so bravely told their own stories, their own personal stories, the Together for Yes organisation, and especially to younger members of our society who worked so hard to deliver this historic yes vote to remove the 8th Amendment. I do sincerely hope that each of those young people fully realise the impact that they have had on this campaign and how their actions work to make a historic change to our Constitution, and that they remain politically engaged. In debating this bill in the House, let us not rehash the referendum debate itself, but to work together constructively to deliver legislation which is reflective of the will of the people, as showcased by the 66.4% vote in favour of repealing the 8th Amendment. Let us work together to deliver a society which is more compassionate and caring towards those who are facing a crisis pregnancy, and let us ensure that they no longer have to travel to access health care, which they now have the power, which we now indeed have the power to deliver for them in their own country. I look forward to supporting this bill last Count Corla, and in the new year I look forward to the women of Ireland being able to receive the healthcare they require with dignity, and to no longer be faced with the prospect of having to travel to the United Kingdom or further afield, or worse, consuming unregulated medication at home. Last Count Corla, thank you, and I fully intend on supporting government on this bill. I understand I may be sharing my time with Deputy Durkin.